especially important as a kind of interface between religious and civil life. You know, they were processed through towns on important holidays. They were brought out whenever armies went to war. And you still see this sometimes in predominantly Catholic countries, in places like Naples, where the blood of St. January is expected to liquefy on 3 occasions during the year. And at that time, the Naples Cathedral is packed with politicians and civil authorities, as well as the faithful. The Vatican, by the way, has never pronounced on that miracle either. They pretty much left it alone. They at one time tried to remove St. January from the calendar of saints, and it provoked a rebellion in Naples, so they backed off. The Vatican figures, well, all right, local Catholics can pretty much believe what they want. To a great degree, though, I think this local aspect of supernatural phenomena is being lost today. Because really, is anything local anymore? Increasingly, what you have are visionaries or an event that is publicized over the internet, and it may begin to draw people from all over. And that is a tremendous challenge to church authorities, because an apparition or a crying statue or a prophecy of doom can go viral well before they have a chance to investigate it. I want to talk a minute about the media. That, I guess, still includes me. When it comes to the supernatural, the media, I think, at times gives us an inaccurate picture of what's happening inside the Catholic Church, especially at the Vatican. For example, we often read about a revival of exorcism, when what the Vatican is generally trying to do, in my opinion, is play down exorcism. Since 1985, the Vatican has been warning against unauthorized exorcisms. And in 2004, it sent a letter to the world's bishops asking each of them to designate and train one priest in their diocese who would handle cases of alleged possession. Now, the intent, although it was not stated this way, the intent was to stop other priests from freelancing as exorcists and give the bishops more control over this. But of course, it was spun in the press as the Vatican is rediscovering exorcism. A similar reaction came when the Vatican released a new rite of exorcism. Those are the prayers used to cast out demons. This new rite, once again, was seen in the media as a revival of the battle with Satan. You know, game on, battle with Satan. Actually, again, too, the intent was to tone down the rhetoric of the ritual. And exorcists did not like it. The old guard exorcists were very unhappy. For one thing, the Vatican told exorcists that they had to work with psychologists and make sure that they weren't dealing with mental or emotional problems. The new rite also removed much of the melodrama from exorcism. You know, instead of the exorcist kind of wrestling the devil to the mat, the priest now seemed to be almost a bystander. I'll read you a little about this new rite. All that immediately provoked the scorn of experienced exorcists who believed cases of possession required direct engagement with the devil, not merely pious prayers. This watered-down version of the ritual that had worked well for hundreds of years lacked the force of the old rite and was far too passive in tone. It introduced an option in which the exorcist asks the devil to depart, rather than commanding him to do so. Moreover, experience had shown that vernacular languages weren't as effective as Latin. For the devil, apparently, Latin carried the traditional ring of defeat. And in fact, the new rite was in the vernacular languages. You will find today many exorcists still use the old rite, even though the Vatican has told them not to. And the Vatican tolerates it. They look the other way. And this old rite, there's kind of an underground market for booklets of the old ritual. So I had to order one from some website. Another area of disagreement between the Vatican's theologians and the old school exorcists is the potential for the devil to enter someone through a curse or a spell. The new rite of exorcism actually prohibits priests from exorcising what it calls overly credulous people who think they've been placed under an evil spell. That led Father Gabriele Amorth in Rome, who is probably the most famous exorcist in the world, to denounce the new rite as a farce. He believes curses and spells are the most common way a demon enters a person. You've probably seen Father Amorth on, if you've ever watched some of these cable TV shows about exorcism. He's the guy they always show because he looks like he came right out of central casting with the black cape and the black bag full of crucifixes and the black hat, and he's quite a remarkable figure. The devil is, of course, a fallen angel, and it surprises people to learn, I write about this in my book, that the Vatican in recent years has intervened frequently to curb excessive belief in angels. Arguably, church officials have given more attention to excessive angel worship than to satanic cults. That doesn't mean the Vatican doesn't believe in angels. They do. Pope Francis, I noted, recently spoke about the importance of having a good relationship with one's guardian angel. But in the Vatican's view, there is a tendency to go overboard when it comes to angels. Some of us may remember how popular angels were back in the 90s, I think it was, when there were angels everywhere. And everything from candles and greeting cards and decorative, everything. Angels everywhere. Back before then, 50 years before then, in the 1940s, an Austrian housewife founded a cult, an organization called Opus Angelorum. It was based on private revelations that she had experienced, in which she said she was given the names, appearances, and job descriptions of hundreds of angels and demons who were engaged in an eternal battle. The movement grew, her movement grew, to include tens of thousands of members, most of them Catholics. Some of them would make important life decisions only after hearing what their angels had commanded. Now, there were special worship rituals that they introduced. The Vatican finally had enough. It intervened. It said all this went against Scripture, which of course names only 3 angels. I'm sure you know who they are: Michael, Gabriel, and Raphael. When the Vatican intervened, it wasn't just the Vatican. It was Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger, who was very attentive to what was going on in German-speaking countries, and at the time he was the Vatican's chief doctrinal official. So they essentially have tried to shut down that group, or at least there is now a spin-off group that says it's working with the Vatican to behave in a proper way. If angels were becoming the new darlings of pop culture back in the 90s, I think the devil in more recent years is also being given a new persona. Remember probably the satanic black mass that was planned for Harvard University in 2014? It was supposed to be a learning experience in cultural diversity. Well, it was called off after protests. More recently, we had the unveiling of a statue of the devil in Detroit. This particular demon has the head of a goat and sits on a chair with 2 smiling children at his side. They look up at him like he's some kind of benevolent uncle. And that is the point, really, for the Satanic Temple, which is the sponsor of these statues. I'm going to read you a chapter from my book on the devil. The Satanic Temple, this is an organization I believe based in New York, was careful to portray its devilish idol not as a symbol of evil, but as an image of tolerance and benevolence, one that would serve, quote, I'm quoting here, serve as a beacon, calling for compassion and empathy among all living creatures. For the Catholic Church, this effort to neutralize Satan's evil nature marked a new challenge, one that reflected an ongoing transformation of the devil in popular culture. Recast as a complex psychological figure, Satan was now being depicted as a creature who was misunderstood by organized religion, and who, in the modern age, might actually help people find their own way to the divine. And believe it or not, this stuff continues. Just this week I was reading in the paper in Phoenix, right? Same group, Satanic Temple, was off on a new initiative. Apparently in Phoenix there was a prayer invocation before every meeting of the city council. And so the Satanic Temple filed a request. They wanted to give the invocation on February 17th. And the lawyers got a hold of it and they debated among themselves and figured, oh, well, we might get sued. So they responded by rather predictably banning all prayer together. Now they're going to have a moment of silence, which no doubt was what the Satanic Temple wanted in the first place. And now they've moved on to Tucson to do the same thing, where one city councilman was quoted as saying, it's fine with him, the city welcomes diversity. Oh. Well, one person who is not buying this kinder and gentler image of the devil is Pope Francis. It's interesting, Pope Francis has spoken repeatedly about Satan. He describes him variously as a con artist, a dangerous manipulator who knows more theology than all the theologians. The Pope has described him as a sly charmer who sometimes comes disguised as an angel. The point is, for Pope Francis, the devil is real, not merely a symbolic or allegorical figure. I'll quote again from what he said. On this point, there is no shadow of a doubt. A battle exists, a battle in which the eternal salvation of us all is at stake. Reminds me, now St. Dunstan, didn't he have a run-in with the devil at one point? I think he was the guy who took the metal tongs and squeezed the devil's, was it his tongue? No. Yeah. His nose, the devil's nose, yes. When Pope Francis first began talking about the devil, and it was very quickly after his election, journalists pretty much ignored it because it was like, did not fit into the kind of political reading of the papacy that journalists love. This is more about something peripheral. But exorcists in Rome grew very excited. After years of Vatican resistance, it seemed they finally had a pope who spoke their language. But their enthusiasm waned, I think, when it became clear that encouraging formal exorcism was not really on the Pope's agenda. In fact, the devil described by Pope Francis is not someone who possesses people violently or, against their will, or who announces his presence, with smoke and sulfur. Instead, this is a devil who leads people into bad habits, like gossiping, or who seduces them with very subtle temptations that then become routine. By Hollywood standards, that's, not all that interesting. I think when it comes to supernatural phenomena, Pope Francis's approach is far more practical than theatrical. He has great devotion to the Virgin Mary, we know that. But a few months after his election, he came very close to ridiculing Catholics who think Mary might be sending off messages at a set time every day, as he put it, like a postmaster. Well, believe me, those words, when they reached the Bosnian village of Medjugorje, stung, because That's the place where many devotees still think Mary is appearing and giving a message every day, every afternoon. More generally, Pope Francis has said that Catholics who are always hunting for supernatural signs are really looking for novelty, not faith. When it comes to miracles, too, the Pope has surprised people. As I explained in my book, the Vatican actually has a complex vetting process for miracles. It's the one area where the Vatican has, okay, this is our method. This is how we're going to really evaluate the supernatural. We have a checklist we go down. We have scientists and doctors who are on the team. We're on this. It's part of the procedure for declaring someone a saint. It involves medical, theological experts, and most miracles today are medical miracles. They're well-documented healings that cannot be explained by doctors. But Pope Francis has unexpectedly set aside the requirement of a miracle for several canonizations, including Pope John the 23rd. You remember, early last year, Pope Francis canonized, he declared saints of John Paul II and John the 23rd in the same ceremony. He wanted to do them together. And in preparing for this, he called in the Vatican saint-making bureaucrats and said, where do we stand on the sainthood causes? And they said, we have a verified miracle for John Paul II, so this canonization can be done anytime you want. And what about John the 23rd? And they said, well, Holy Father, we're still studying that. We have several possibilities, but, you know, this could take a long time. And the Pope said, okay, fine. I'm going to canonize him anyway. We don't need a miracle. Everybody knows he's a saint, which a Pope can do. He waived it. Since then, he has waived it for several others, including when he was in the United States. You may recall, he canonized Father Junipero Serra. He waived the miracle requirement for that canonization. He's done it for several, which has prompted, you know, Vatican experts to wonder if the Church may be moving away from medical miracles as this presumed stamp of approval for sainthood. You know, Pope Francis believes miracles do happen, but I think it's a wider understanding of the miraculous. Modern miracles, the Pope says, are more about patient struggle than sudden spectacle. The way he put it in a speech he gave recently, he said, God doesn't work like a fairy with a magic wand. He's actually spoken more recently during his U.S. trip about miracles that happen in families. It's about relationships. It's about these patient struggles that go on in and outside of families between people who are working either to reconcile or to hand on faith, you know, things like that. Nevertheless, the Vatican has hundreds of miracle files in their archives, things that are documented, those that have been approved and those that have been rejected. Now, when you talk to Vatican officials, whose job it is to catalog these things, they are very proud of their record. In fact, I've talked with two experts who went into their archives and have spent a long time researching them, and they have told me that we have not found a case of a miracle, a declared miracle, to have been a fraud, or you know, a healing that turned out to be false. So, as far as the Vatican is concerned, they think they're batting 1,000 on this. And they don't necessarily want to give up the idea of medical miracles. They think, no, it's God showing that he still does work in this world, and these are important signs. Well, in my chapter on miracles, I wrote about several presumed miracles, including the case of 3 young athletes in Kansas. And I will tell you this story. Some of you may be familiar with Father Emil Capon. Anybody ever heard his name? Well, if you read my book, you'll know who he is. You'll be impressed. The story begins in 1950 in a tiny Czech community near Wichita, a little town called Pilsen, Kansas. Now, the local priest was a young man, Father Emil Capon, who in truth, was bored with parish life. He had served as a chaplain in the army a little bit after World War II, and he's stuck in this little town. He liked the people, they were his people, but there wasn't that much to do. So he signed up again as an army chaplain. And almost immediately the Korean War broke out. And guess what? Father Kapam was in the first unit sent to the front lines in North Korea. His unit was almost immediately overrun by Chinese troops. And he and his fellow soldiers found themselves in a Chinese prison camp. This was a cold, damp, and deadly place where prisoners starved to death. And this is where Father Kapam earned a reputation as a hero and a saint. I'll read you just a little from my book. This is when Father Kapam was captured. At one point, as astounded Chinese soldiers stood and watched, Kapam saved an American sergeant from execution by boldly pushing away an enemy combatant's rifle. The sergeant, Herb Miller, had had an ankle shattered by a grenade, so Kapam hoisted him over his shoulder and carried him. The prisoners were marched 60 miles to a North Korean prison camp, where Kapam threw himself into action. He nursed the sick and wounded, fashioned iron vessels to store clean drinking water, and defying camp guards, he led spiritual services for fellow captives. He washed the inmates' soiled garments and picked lice from their bodies. At night, he would artfully slip into unguarded areas to steal extra food. His courage and compassion became legendary among the POWs, as did his sense of humor. Love your enemies, he would tell his companions, but then add the Latin joke phrase, ne illegitimi carborundum esse. Don't let the bastards grind you down. His Chinese captors viewed Kapam as an agitator, one who openly resisted the communist indoctrination programs. When the guards mocked him for his faith, he would preach to them, saying that his God was as real as the air they breathed but could not see. Well, after 7 months in the camp, Father Kapam succumbed to malnutrition, and he died there. When the war was over, his body was never recovered. But the camp prisoners who survived kept his memory alive. They came home and told his story to anyone who would listen. But guess what? Time passes. And, 99.9% of Catholics in the United States probably have never heard of him.